Well, when I read the introduction to the book that's going to be the center of one of the studies in Lent, sponsored by the Spiritual Formation Council and the Academy for Faith and Life, the author's words, in my mind, dovetailed with what Jennings hears in his reading of Acts about what God desires for human joining. Listen to her words. She is professor of New Testament and Jewish studies at Vanderbilt Divinity School, Amy Jill Levine. She reminds us in this book, quote, to study Jesus and the Gospels is in fact to study Jewish history. Jesus was a Jew, as were all his early followers. In studying the New Testament, I am therefore studying the Jewish history that I never learned in my own synagogue. What can a Jewish person teach you about the Gospels? Although I do not worship Jesus, I find much of his message of the kingdom compelling. So why aren't you Christian? People often ask her. She responds this way, quote, belief or faith is a matter not of logic or of academic ability. It is a matter of grace, and so a matter of calling, of vocation. I am personally completely fulfilled in my own tradition, and yet, I see the beauty and wonder in the gospel story. I can, as an historian, guide my students to read more closely, to find more meaning, and to appreciate more deeply this magnificent text. And if I, as a Jew, can see so much profound teaching in these pages, surely my Christian friends can find even more. I don't seek to challenge Christian theological claims. Instead, I seek through my studies and my teaching to enhance them. End of quote. How Levine embodies and practices her faith and vocation as an Orthodox Jew who pushes back against the limits of that tradition put on women often, and also a Christian seminary professor of Christian and Jewish studies, seems to me to be in line with how Jennings hears God's desire for humans to practice self-care by contributing to the creation of the common and resisting what would do injury to it. Levine reinforces Jennings' point that Christianity does not supersede Judaism, a claim made by some Christians, and for some others, a basis for anti-Semitism, because some of Jesus' own people disowned him and were complicit in his murder, along with the forces of empire. So Levine is about the task of helping Jews and Christians learn from each other how God is alive in each of their traditions, texts, and people, and an authentic guide to loving God and loving neighbor. Her passion for bringing about mutual respect and deeper understanding is apparent in her speaking and writing. Levine's words suggest to me that the church is one religious institution among many in the common, called by God to a vocation of seeking to be, in its public face and private practices, the inclusive, justice-seeking community of human beings that God is inspiring through the witness of Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit. And Jim, you might like to say a few more words about what's coming up next. in Lent on behalf of the Academy?
The class of the Path of Discipleship is being held, pardon me, on Tuesday nights coming up from 6 to 7:30. I am not sure there are still openings in it, but people can reach out to Carol Allen if they want to attend these small, not small, I shouldn't say that, very directed classes each Tuesday night, led by a pastor from Fourth Church with facilitators, members of the church facilitating small groups to explore different questions. So it's very good. I'm not sure if it's filled or not right now, but if you're interested, send an email to Carol Allen or look it up on the website.
Carol Allerton?
Allerton, yes.
Allerton, right. I was going to say that, but I want to wait till you're finished. Yeah.
So the Spiritual Formation Council and the Academy are combining to offer Levine's book also beginning next Tuesday, I believe.
Yes, starts this Tuesday. And Levine's book is the text for the 6 weeks. I don't know if David has anything to add to that or not.
No, it's going to, Lucy Forster Smith is going to lead off this coming Tuesday.
Right.
And it has a great format. So we have a presentation, we have breakout groups, we have worship at the end, and yeah, it'll be a great time. And there may be, I'd go ahead and contact Carol, because there may be some cancellations, or there may be a couple of more places if we open up another group leader, have another group leader, which would be me.
So David, is the music Taizé? Like Nanette used to do Taizé every week, and I was just wondering.
Each pastor is going to organize her and his own worship. So whatever they choose to say, it's possible, but be surprised.
Okay.
Even better, be surprised.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, last week, a member of our class, Barbara Cathy, volunteered to read this fascinating essay in the February 10th issue of the Christian Century. It's a contemporary example of the revolutionary approach to church and to continuing to restore God's beloved community. Barbara is pastor emeritus of the Edgewater Presbyterian Church. That's the church, by the way, where your former pastor, associate pastor of mission, Vicki Curtis, and her husband, Kent Organ, are now interim co-pastors. And Barbara Cathy has lots of experience working in interracial and intercultural settings. So Barb, thanks very much. I'm very eager to hear what you've discovered in this fascinating article with the most amazing name of the church. So you're on.
All right. So the article that I looked at and agreed to do in a moment of weakness last Sunday is about Beloved Everybody Church in Los Angeles. And Beloved Everybody is what's called an ability inclusive church. So people of all kinds of abilities and disabilities, intellectual as well as physical, are intentionally a part of that church. And so Carol asked for, what are some of the things I noted in the article? So let me just share those. Beloved Everybody goes beyond inclusion of people with disabilities. They're about creating something that's new, that's transformational. And they talk about, they recognize the importance of healing in the Christian tradition, but they go beyond a physical, medical model of healing to really the healing of the human community by the way that they are community with and for each other. The second thing, at Beloved Everybody, they honor each person's uniqueness And they don't let differences divide them. And this goes beyond abilities and disabilities, even to the way that they do the passing of the peace. And I think there are many churches that could benefit from what they discovered, but they set up a name tag system where if you have a red name tag system, it means you do not want to be touched. Greeted during the passing of the peace, not touched. A yellow name tag means that you welcome a handshake or a high five. And a green name tag means that you will give and receive hugs, or well, you will receive hugs. You want hugs. And so in that way, all the people are welcomed, but each in their own, in the way that feels most welcoming to them. Third, beloved everybody values community over efficiency and relationships over success. As one member said, the way that some people love others with abandon, vulnerability, and authenticity seeds, feeds, and nurtures the love and vulnerability in us all. And fourth, beloved everybody has let go of there being a right way to do things so that everyone can be involved. They explore ways that people can lead even when they don't use words to communicate. Rather than having one person at the front proclaiming the word, they believe that God speaks through everyone in the community, and they allow more people to speak during worship. And an example of that is a 30-year-old autistic young man who speaks the benediction each Sunday, and he speaks from, does speak from the front, and all of the members reach out their hands as a sign that they are receiving his blessing. So Carol asked me then how would I connect what Jennings has said to Beloved Everybody Church? And a phrase that Carol has repeated from Jennings is boundary crossing and border transgressing. And I would say that Beloved Everybody is a boundary crossing, border transgressing church. They don't define if or how someone should participate or be in leadership by their abilities or their disabilities, by their skill and experience or their lack thereof. This church opens the binaries of abled and disabled. The disabled are not just tolerated or included, they are embraced. Their presence and their uniqueness changes the identity of the whole community. The community is open to being changed by everyone who is there. And all the members are committed to and changed by the community and work toward the common. At Beloved Everybody, there's a constant awareness of simultaneously holding difference and creating community. And I felt like that was something that we continue to see both in Jennings and in the book of Acts, as there are those tensions between the Hellenists and the Jews, the Gentiles and the Jews, and how are they going to hold this community together when those divisions keep popping up. There's also a high degree of vulnerability on the part of the pastor and every member. And so no one plays it safe or insists on being who they've always been. There's a constant sense of risk, and they know that and they're open to that. And what might be called failure is seen as an opportunity for learning. And in Acts, this was how the early church and the apostles functioned, and the importance of the vulnerability and faithfulness of their spirit-guided improv. So that's what I noted.
Oh. So
Bravo.
all kinds of
Thank you.
disabilities.
Great vision.
Yeah, I can't imagine a church like that. It was sort of like that in Iona, but what a challenge.
Can I just stop you a minute?
Sure.
We thought we'd go now into breakout groups, and Barb posed a question and Jim has it for us. and then we can come back into the whole group.
Hold on.
Maybe are there questions for clarification of Barb? And then we can get into examples like Annette wants to share, is ready to share. Then these are questions. When you get into your breakout, think of a church or other organization you've been part of where some people were significantly different from others in terms of abilities, education, cultural background, race, or beliefs, and yet it felt like a beloved community. What were some of the shared values or practices that made this possible? How were you challenged by being a part of this church organization? And how were you changed by being part of it? Let's see what we've experienced between ourselves. If Barbara, can I put you on the spot? Barbara was just beginning.
Why not, Carol?
Explain what kind, what else is putting you on the spot. Barbara was just explaining the kind of congregation Edgewater is. I will never forget your talk about doing funerals with Hindus, but what's the nature? Do you mind if you don't know Edgewater, you may want to go and put your toe in that water, but Barbara, would you just briefly describe the makeup of Edgewater and what that meant to be a part of that congregation?
Sure. So Edgewater, now it's about, I'd say 50% African from a variety of countries.
Different tribes, tribal background.
Right, different tribal backgrounds, and also different, I mean, they were most all from former British colonies, although, one family, a couple from French colonies, folks from India, Korea, gay and straight, about 10% mentally ill, because there's a residence for the mentally ill half a block from the church that the church has had a ministry to and with for a long time. One of the things I was sharing we had different, I would begin every service with, okay, with all of our differences and giving, and we celebrate today and always that Jesus Christ has made us one. That was my opening mantra every Sunday. And we would have two welcomes, as I was saying in my small group. At 11 o'clock, there would be a welcome. And then, but very few people were there at 11 o'clock because of different rhythms of time. And so 20 minutes later, I would do, or 15, I would do another welcome. For the 3/4 of the people that had finally showed up. Yeah, and Annette was saying she'd been on the Zoom, and it's quite different with Zoom because people actually, they actually do come at 11 o'clock, basically. I mean, maybe we had one more screen full later, but she didn't like the music. And I said, well, no, we got a grant actually from the Lilly Foundation to do more culturally conscious worship. And so the music more reflects who's in the congregation. And so the doxology, for years we've sung in Igbo, which is a language from Nigeria. And the words are printed in the bulletin, but over time, everybody, it's just a couple of lines. People have learned it. So you just, new people have the phonetic spellings in the bulletin, but, it's not difficult. Most of our music does come out of the Presbyterian hymnal, so probably off pages that you don't typically use at Fourth. I learned while I was pastor there a variety of customs. So if you have an Indian baby, when the baby moves from the parents' bed to their own crib, there's a celebration. when the baby goes from having only being on the bottle to eating their first solid food, you have another celebration. And the pastor is always part of that. The family is always part of that. It would be that way. So we would learn all these celebrations. In Nigerian, mostly West African cultures, often you break the kola nut as part of, which is both a tribal ritual and has gone over into Christian ritual. And so kola nuts are really bitter. I really don't like kola nut, but you learn that, you break the kola nut and you eat the kola nut and take as small a piece as possible. But and so that's a part of it. And also at session meetings, people had different ways of decision making. And so over time, the way session operated changed. And but it was because everyone valued everyone else. And there was enough risk and vulnerability and I will say laughter. Laughter was a big part of it because everybody, there were equal opportunities for faux pas all over the place. And so it's
to eat Thanksgiving dinner at Bob and Barbara Cathy's is the United Nations. It's quite wonderful. And you've had many interactions with other clergy from other faiths as you've done memorial services and burials and so forth, and other learning, as you just said, about the Indian culture. You've learned how to be minister within other cultures and recognize their ways of doing. Thank you very much. Let me put you on the spot. Any other insights come out of your small groups that you want to share?
I just want to know what church this was that Barb was talking about.
It's Edgewater, which is where Vicki Curtis and Kent Organ are now the interim co-pastor. So,
it's on Edgewater Street, or
it's on Bryn Mawr Avenue.
Yes. Okay.
Right off Lakeshore Drive.
I went there for a service once, and I didn't know what it was about, except I heard that it was for the mentally ill, or at least mentally ill were welcome there. And I have a connection with mental illness, so I went to see what it was like, and you can imagine what I saw. The service is going on, people come in late, and they get up when they want, go to another seat or go this way.
No, we didn't use the word late there. We called it different rhythms of time.
Okay, well, I didn't know that then. I didn't know what the language, but that's just what I observed as an outsider.
Right.
So.
Another beloved everybody church.
Yeah. Actually, Suzanne, it's with the mentally ill. We did dinner at Sarah's Circle. Perhaps some of you know about Sarah's Circle, Residence for the Homeless.
Yeah.
And women. And so once a month we did dinner for Sarah's Circle. And some of the mentally ill were the most involved in preparing dinner, which was also, to have, you don't just have diversity in worship, you have diversity everywhere. And so it was quite interesting in the kitchen.
I could imagine. That is so wonderful. What a great mission. Yes.
How much of the congregation, Barb, is the more gentrified population? I mean, that neighborhood.
Yeah, right. It's a gentrified neighborhood, and so it's been increasing. I would say, Ira, at this point, it's about 20 to 30% of the congregation.
What do you know? What it was like back in the 60s and 70s? I mean,
white.
I'm thinking
it was all white. It was all white.
Yeah.
It started to change about 30 years ago. The first Africans came. So that would be what,
70s.
70 in the 70s, but it was predominantly, it was, and definitely there was no one except whites on the session until the mid 90s.
I think I
Oh.
better go there again. I think I'll go there again.
Yeah. I wanted to say that I did enjoy the service. And so I didn't, even though I'm persnickety about my music, I don't want you to think I didn't enjoy hearing what they did. I love the children's corner. That's really wonderful. And I like the time that's taken so people can talk freely and no one's in a rush. Like many times when you're mentally ill, other people get extremely impatient and uncomfortable. But there was a lot of time taken. And beforehand, sometimes I went to their, they call it chats. I went to their chats and I'm impressed. I mean, we certainly are a beloved community. That's clear.
Thank
That's
you.
wonderful. What a great example for the rest of us to
Mhm.
appreciate.
And in the small groups, I know there were people that shared some measure of a glimpse of this. In our group, someone worked with in the prison system and what it meant to them to be there, what they learned about themselves, as well as what would be possible to create community. So thank you very much, Barbara, and all of
Yeah.
you. We'll move on, but we can come back at another time. We have one more class left. And I wanted to go on and axe a bit with Mr. Jennings. And in the reading for this week, he mentions a disciple of Jesus named Timothy, the mulatto child, who was destined to appear, says Jennings, because they are always present in diaspora where Jew and Gentile meet in the spaces of exile and longing. Timothy's mother was a Jew and a believer, and his father was a Greek, Gentile, and not a believer. Timothy was held in high esteem by the followers of Jesus, and so the Apostle Paul, as you remember, formerly named Saul, who had persecuted and brutalized Jewish followers of Jesus, was now a missionary following his own dramatic conversion to the way of Jesus and healing and also suffering for his beliefs, invited Timothy to accompany him on missionary journeys. Believing it was necessary in conformance with his own Jewish background, Paul had Timothy circumcised before heading into outer-lying Jewish territories. So Jennings is now drawing us into the space where Barbara has been and was taking us glimpses of this morning, into the space of interracial and intercultural life, and a model of church that Jennings calls Timothy-like existence. That means, he says, that he is at home in the worlds of Jew and Gentile precisely because he is a Christian. Try to get your minds around that. Jennings says he is already what a Christian must be, a question to everyone and every people, and he's also the answer. Jennings goes on to explain. Timothy is living what Jennings calls an in-between existence, Christian existence. The power of this existence is, quote, love without contradiction, and such love is always possible. It is possible for Timothy to love the Gentiles of his father and the Jews of his mother, and with both, and through both, and in both, to perform his commitment to Jesus. This is the inner logic, says Jennings, of the Christian. We can inhabit, sometimes we inhibit, we can inhabit new cultural sites of love, different languages, different holy gestures, different customs and rituals of life, and perform through the Spirit deepening love for the world and for Jesus the Christ, the Savior and God of the world. Such love presents no competition and no conflicted loyalties. It only gestures overwhelming addition. This is the work of the Spirit, for and within those led by the Spirit. And Jennings goes on to elaborate. Timothy is an embodied word of what Paul preaches. So how so? How can this newly circumcised flesh present the new order? By drawing the story of Israel forward through the body of one whose body is also the Goyim. Timothy is born of transgressing love, and his circumcision confirms and transgresses. He is of Israel, but now Israel's promise is enfolded in Gentile flesh. Jennings comments that this is a moment of improvisation by the creative work of the Spirit. Timothy does not need a circumcision, but in this case, it may be keeping him from persecution and violence, stemming from the anxiety of the diaspora people. Timothy has had to go through life improvising all along, so this is simply another instance of it. Why is this appearance of Timothy in Scripture significant, Jennings asked. What does it mean to be born of two peoples? Something new, unpredictable, and for some, of course, terribly threatening presents itself in the life of a person who presents such unions. Think of kinds of in-between existence, like unions between whites and non-whites, between peoples of European descent and peoples of non-European descent, an existence between people of different cultures, tribes, or nations, two peoples within one body. Could you imagine a new way of seeing and being yourself? Jennings asked. For us captured in the cross currents of racial and cultural forms of belonging, such a question needs to be asked. Quote, it remains a horrible fact that racial and cultural belonging are most often far more powerful and compelling than Christian belonging. The form of belonging that Christian witness should in fact be is a profound question to everyone who encounters us. Could you imagine a new way of seeing and being yourself, a way that weaves together the ways of many peoples? So many churches have never understood their in-between reality, their Timothy-like existence. Indeed, the church is formed precisely inside the very body of Jesus Christ, fully human, fully divine. Jesus presents to us a question. Could we imagine a new way of seeing both God and human existence? Would we enter a new way of being in and through him? To quote Jennings, Jesus defines for us both humanity and divinity. His life does not simply hold them together. His life shows us what they are and who we are in God. Consider the refugee couple, Priscilla and Aquila. They were under some kind of threat in Rome and left to join the Apostle Paul on a missionary journey. They, like Paul, were tent makers and itinerants, following the Spirit wherever it led to the sharing in the ministry of Jesus. Jennings comments that as disciples together, Priscilla and Aquila are the best working definition of a Christian couple. Jennings points out that Luke confirms, quote, Paul's stability. He's a faithful child of Israel. He has not left the sensibilities of his people or left his people. He is also a faithful collaborator with the Jerusalem church. What has fully emerged in this narrative apologetic for Paul is the seamless joining of worlds, Jew and Gentile, through his body. Paul is moving between words now from Jerusalem to Antioch, from synagogue to the Jesus cells and Gentile homes, from faithful Jews to God-fearing Gentiles, and to all those in between. There is an in-between biracial character of Paul's life now that we must never forget to note. This call by the Holy Spirit of God raises a tough question. Jennings puts it this way: how can disciples follow the Spirit and yet follow segregationist thinking? This is the dilemma of the church. This is our ongoing struggle with the newness of the Spirit. Another way to frame this question is, the Spirit has shown God-fearing Gentiles and diaspora-anxious Jews that they can enter another people without fear of being lost in another people. How can the Spirit who joins and diaspora fear that separates exist in the same body? Jennings continues, this is the church's ongoing struggle with the newness of the Spirit. Still, yet, after all these centuries, we are yet committed to separate but equal thinking, yet imbibing diaspora anxiety. We often long for homogeneity, which is the desire for a sameness that helps us cope with the diversity that we cannot separate or control. That longing leads to the futile performance of authenticity, masquerading as commitment to God, but in actuality only plays to a watching crowd. End of quote. Church after church has not grown from Pentecost. The fundamental difference between the Jerusalem church and our churches is that they struggled to imagine an expansion of Torah-filled life into Gentile space that would alter Jewish space without loss of identity. We who live on the other side of Christian colonialism have watched the emergence of a soul-killing, people-destroying expansionism that forced peoples into a Christian sameness, an orthodoxy of body and dress, comportment and character that has numbed the minds of many and presented this faith as exquisite subjugation. Quote, the struggle was and continues to be a struggle of sight and hope. We must see the Spirit who enters lives without destroying lives and joins with us, becoming one with us, while remaining the Spirit of God. We must see a Spirit that joins Jew and Gentile and joins people without destroying peoples. And yet the Spirit expands into our lives and becomes new in us, new every morning. The Spirit would draw us into that newness where peoples do not lose themselves, but find themselves through the additions of others. End of quote. And finally, let's turn back to the Apostle Paul to further illuminate what Jennings hears in Acts about the fellowship that God desires. We enter Paul's story today at the point where, says Jennings, Paul has become like Jesus. Luke frames the journey of Paul inside the journey of Jesus. This one, like that one, has set his mind on Jerusalem now. This one, like that one, looks to the day of Pentecost. Paul now gathers those who knew his ministry and shared his life. They are signs of the Spirit working in him, and they represent a geographic spread of diaspora, Jew, and Gentile together. This is the sign of the gospel in effect, a mixed group moving in the same direction. What place is ready for such a group? Paul is heading to Jerusalem. Quote, God knows intimately what it means to be a body at risk in this world, a body in imminent danger. Paul now knows this too. But imminent danger is the reality of so many people in this world. So then what is the difference? Paul is showing us that God has drawn that risk into his divine life, so that the risk and dangers that may confront us in life will not define our life. Indeed, Paul here articulates his life redefined by the pain and hope of Jesus. Luke is giving us the beginnings of a cruciform existence, where my life has been taken from me and given back to me, but not as my own, but as God's own life. The value of my life has been transferred to God, and I no longer hold it in my hands or by my efforts. Paul's is a body in the spirit, having released control of it to God and given himself without remainder to the ministry of Jesus Christ. But Jennings cautions us, no one can force someone into this way of life. He goes on to clear up a common confusion of disciples and pastors. An invitation is not an injunction. No one should be compelled to sacrifice in the way of Jesus. The church has been and continues to be guilty of the ideological use of sacrifice as a way to feed an addiction to control bodies. It was and is this addiction that distorts the truth of the self-giving of Jesus, turning it into simply an example of the kind of sacrifice others must give, especially women, children, and those imagined as needing heavy domestication. This is not Paul's aim. Quote, an intimate world of becoming one with their lover is being opened in this discourse, in which this disciple Paul has found his way to union with God, and he invites us, others, to find our way as well. So his admonition to the other disciples is to find their way so that they might see clearly. Churches continue to struggle with seeing the crucial difference between a stability rooted in the old ways of family, nation, or religion, and one rooted in grace, end of quote. Jennings would say that discernment of this difference is a matter of good self-care. Well, next week is the last session in our course, and I'm wondering now, of course, you've been hearing Jennings through my eyes. Some of you are reading the commentary. It's thick and dense. It keeps going over and over the main themes. I'm wondering if he could be with us next week. What questions would you like to ask him? And what insights about God's beloved community did you read from this, from his reading of Acts? I wonder if he'd be willing to take a couple minutes and think about that and share. I know we're beginning to run low on time. I'm wondering whether we should go into breakouts or stay in the whole group. What's your pleasure?
I think we should stay in the home group. We only have 5 minutes.
Yes, I agree.
So if Willie James Jennings was with us, what questions would you like to ask him? And what insights about God's beloved community did you gain from his reading of Acts, knowing that it's been filtered, of course, but what you've gleaned? Just jump in as you're willing to share, please.
I would like to find a nice way to ask him, when you write things so densely, is it because you want to make us read it more than once and think about it? Or is that just that I'm not,
Scholarly enough.
I'm not acquainted that much with scholarly biblical writing. In my field, we make things as easy to understand as possible. So I like to get some insight into that in a nice way.
We
I'd
could
like-
use a pamphlet or
I would like to ask the same question, and I would even say to him, do you realize it's off-putting for people who don't want to read scholarly works?
I would like to ask him what his church looks like.
Yeah.
Has he been able to put, be in a church that's inclusive? Maybe not necessarily like Edgewater, but inclusive, more inclusive. And also, I'd like to know if he feels as though, how do I put this? I'd like to know if he feels that he's getting somewhere when he teaches to white audiences or
when he
preaches.
teaches what, Regan?
I'd like to know if he has an understanding or a feel if he's getting somewhere when he's preaching or teaching to white audiences. If he feels like if he's reaching me or changing me in some way by this kind of teaching.
I get the feeling that his audience is seminarians, seminary students. And that would be an excellent question. What do the white seminary students think of his teaching? Are they getting something out of it? I think they should, but it would be, you'd have to work to get it.
He, in his After Whiteness and Education and Belonging, which he was addressing at the lecture at McCormick last week, also, in some of his other writing, he has wrestled with both African American students and white students who resist because of different backgrounds and agendas, of course, but for 20 years, he has wrestled with how to create community and teach in the seminary classroom. He wrote Acts, he said, for church audiences and church use. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Well, I'd like to say one thing about what I've learned from Jennings. I've been in many situations that are not like me, and struggled with that. Now I know there's a value to it.
That precedent
What?
and a huge precedent for it.
Yeah, that I don't have to be in people with people just like myself. And I can value all those many experiences when I've been like an outsider.
There's a wonderful Mennonite, a woman with a Mennonite background who grew up in a church in Washington, D.C. that is in this ballpark. And she is writing a history now of this church. And I told her about A Light in the City, just as one example of a social history with church embedded in it. She would be someone to bring on board. She worked at the Christian Century at one time.
Okay.
And she might be someone to bring on board at some time.
What's her name?
I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
I want to ask her permission first.
Yeah, sure. I understand that.
But I think she would be willing.
I got a whole new appreciation for the Book of Acts, period.
Mm.
So I'm glad we're
It's easy to stay with the Gospels and sort of ignore all that good stuff because it's so far back. Sylvia.
I've really enjoyed the class and his writing, and I think part of it was because I watched the McCormick lecture. He just became more alive to me. I would encourage everybody to do that. I keep struggling with how do you have institutions rooted in grace? You can't mandate grace to the people who are in the community. So I keep struggling with how do you have institutions rooted in grace, and how does that manifest itself in a church? Sounds like it certainly does as Edgewater, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Is there another Edgewater around, Barbara, or any other ones like these that you know of?
I should just add, you know, Edgewater is made up of flawed human beings like every other church. And so, so I like to portray it as just this, you know, kingdom of God on earth. But, you know, it's pretty, it has its, well, anyway, the moments
guys are-
and the places where diversity hasn't held, unity has not held in
Uh-huh.
the midst of diversity.
I
Yeah,
picked that up. I picked that up. But I
You-
still find it
I
interesting.
see this, I see another forum coming on. You know, there's another person that I talk to regularly who came to me talking about how do I take the whole person of my student and myself as teacher into the classroom, not just from the head up. She's been a longtime college professor and is getting tired from the model of the head up. She doesn't want to proselytize, that's not her role, but she wants to, how do I bring my spirituality, their spirituality? She's written the most beautiful book. It's a draft of a manuscript on time in India. Anyway, I'm sorry, this is not about me, but you're just getting me going on these there are other models out there is what I'm trying to say, or people struggling with the same thing that Jennings is struggling with and that we struggle with him. So I best be quiet now, but we've gotten to the end and Jim will put up the reading. We have one more week and we're going to look at what Jennings thinks the disciple citizen is, how he puts discipleship and citizenship.
Okay.
So you can fill in the blank for next week. The disciple is a citizen who, what?
Like it.
Okay.
thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Carol.
Who?
Very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Take care.
See you next week.
See you next week. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Carol.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Barb.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you,
Barb.
Barb.
Well,
That was
thank you
fun.
for letting me be part of this group. It's been
Yeah.
wonderful.
Thanks a lot.